Hi, this is David Roche. There are some things going on which are relevant to geopolitical strategy, economic order, and of course your portfolio. Let me run through them on just in time, hopefully, for your weekend. First of all, in Japan, Kazuo Ueda has been rumored very strongly from reliable sources to become the next governor of the Bank of Japan. And he is going to be backed with two new deputy governors. One is Shinichi Uchida, who is already an executive director, and the other one is Ryotsu, who is the former head of the FSA. Both will become deputy governors. Now, the market sees this as a compromise candidate, not quite as dovish as the candidate Amaniya, but nevertheless not somebody who's going to reform the BoJ, and I think that's wrong. The background of Ueda is one which academically terminates in a PhD from MIT. He is a pragmatic, hands-on reformer. And I think backed by the two new deputy governors, what this is going to do is going to end Japan's policy of super easy monetary policy, I would say hyper easy monetary policy, and yield curve control. That means that the yen is going to recover from its current level of around 130 to 110 per US dollar or below. And secondly, it means that we're going to see JGB yields at much higher levels. They're at 50 basis points today, 0.5 of 1%, and they're likely to go to 1.5%. So these are two major market changes, which in a sense will over time happen. They will hasten the weakening of the US dollar. And of course, the yen will be stronger than the European currency as well. But that is a pretty major shift in policy, which the market has not yet taken on board, because, as I said, they consider that the new central bank governor, Ueda, is a compromise candidate and does not have strong positions of his own, but I think that will turn out to be wrong. The second topic we need to cover briefly is Turkey and the dreadful earthquake with its huge humanitarian costs. Now, many of the buildings which fell down are new buildings, not old buildings. And they were built during Erdogan's period in office, and they're likely to have been built with inadequate or non-existent earthquake compliance. Or in other words, they would never have been built with the proper inbuilt protection against earthquakes, which they should have had. And this is very likely to exert a considerable damage to Erdogan's political support, with elections due in May, though they may now be put off until June because of earthquake damage, making them difficult to hold. But the Erdogan's succession to himself in office, even in such a flawed democracy and such a mismanaged economy as Turkey, is not a done deal anymore. And of course, the markets would rejoice if somebody as power-seeking and economically incompetent as he were to be replaced. They probably wouldn't rejoice for very long, because it would take a considerable stabilizing factor, even though he himself is not is not really the sort of person one wants to see in power if one is decent. But nevertheless, he does help to stabilize the Black Sea and the Russian position in places like Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, Azerbaijan, etc. And if he was gone, a lot of cards would be thrown up in the air. So, but Turkey is important, and it's coming up. The third aspect we want to discuss is Ukraine. The Ukrainian offensive, or rather the Russian offensive in Ukraine, is looking more and more like it's happening. Whether it is about to happen or is actually happening, what we're seeing is another thing. But in any case, the big risk there is that Russia moves to a dominant position in a war of attrition, which would then pose the question for the West: are we going to let Putin declare victory, exert control over Luhansk and Donetsk, and go home, and the West just has to swallow it and get on with business, not as usual, but at least get on with dealing with Russia? Or are we going to look at a position where the West is not able, morally, ethically, or in terms of the ongoing threat which Putin and Russia represent to Western democracies, they're not able to accept a war of attrition in Ukraine with Russia with a dominant hand in that war being declared a victory by Putin, in which case the big question which that would make necessary to answer by Western and other democratic powers is: do we arm Ukraine to win this war? Do we give it the missiles which are long range enough to knock out Russian infrastructure and support for and supply lines to the army? Do we give Ukraine missiles which are long enough, which allow it to cut off Russian supplies to Crimea and make the Russian position in Crimea untenable, and all the risks that would entail for what Putin would actually do about it, how he would react? Would he press the nuclear button? Would he cut the transatlantic cables? What would be his next step in escalation? Because escalation there would be. The point I'm making here, the Ukraine war is generally now seen by economic participants as being a kind of a neutral factor which grinds on unpleasantly in the background. It is not. We are moving to a position where the war of attrition will put one party or the other in a commanding position. And at the moment, given what's going on around Lyman, Bakhmut, Zaporizhzhia, the nuclear plant, I think it is most unlikely that Ukraine is going to be in a dominant position. So Russia could be in a dominant position. And then the big question is, do we arm Ukraine to reverse that permanently? Or do we accept that that is good enough grounds for stalemate, which Putin can call victory and go home, leaving him in control of the huge swathes of Ukraine? That is going to be a major question. And saying that what's happening in Ukraine, what Russia is doing is neutral, it is really not true. The gear has moved out of neutral. The vehicle is moving forward as I speak. Next topic, which is worth speaking about, is energy. We have seen Russia announce that it's going to cut its production by 500,000 barrels a day from the beginning of March. That is approximately 5% of its production, 0.5% of global production. It's what we expected to happen, which is that even if Russia could load its embargoed and price capped, vastly discounted crude and petroleum products onto shadow tankers and ship them off to China and India, it is, one, highly unlikely that China and India wants that much more Russian output. They're much more interested in doing deals with Saudi Arabia, which will give them a political advantage, which Russia, frankly, it represents but a liability, not an advantage. So the client base is probably not there for Russia to ship to offset the effect of the total embargoes and total price caps. Certainly not in revenue terms, and what we're now seeing is not in volume terms either, not in terms of production. So the likelihood is that that 5% cut is going to become 10%. Now, that sounds all terrific and good, because you say, well, if Russia is cutting the price of its energy outputs, why does this matter to us? It's a good thing for the world, less inflation, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't work that way at all. If Russia's supply is withdrawn from world markets, then what happens is that world oil prices go up, because all the customers who used to use those Russian products don't have access to them anymore, or don't want to have access to them anymore. And so what they do is they have to go off and buy crude from another source, or buy oil products from another source. And this, of course, means that the demand side has been unchanged by what happened, but the supply side has shrunk globally, and the result is higher energy prices. Now, as you know, the market expects energy prices to hang around the mid-80s in terms of US dollars per barrel of Brent. We think they're going to 120 this year, and then to 140 next year. And that is certainly a major game changer as regards the ability of central banks to cut interest rates, because the external pressures of inflation will remain in place. And also, of course, as regards portfolio performance and the world economic performance, because higher energy prices transfers resources from consumers and investors to people who hoard cash to a greater degree, and therefore results in a net increase in savings and decline in demand. So this is not neutral either for world output, which will be lower, and it is not neutral for inflation, which will be higher. Finally, the China balloon. It's kind of funny that a diplomatic incident involving a balloon should actually result in such what seems structural damage to China-American relations. But of course, those relations were already severely damaged. What the balloon reminds you is that these countries spy on each other continually, America on China and China on America, that relationships are extremely bad, and that it takes very little to tip things into areas of increased hostility, particularly as regards embargoes on trade products, which may potentially be used by the military, technological products, which may be used by the military, are used in espionage equipment. It reminds me of the sort of Jean Le Carré type novel and scenario, and strictly in a black and white movie type. But the balloon reminds us that Chinese-American relationships are not getting back to normal. And of course, China's support for Russia will make that more difficult, and Russian relationships with any decent democracy are not getting back to normal within my lifestyle. But the way in which the screw will be turned on these countries will be very much, in the beginning at least, technological. And they will be deprived of the technology to make their armies effective, and deprived of the technology to give them the productivity and growth which they require for their autocracies to feel comfortable in power. They will not be able to satisfy the aspirations of the people. That's it for me. They're the big factors that have come up over this weekend, and I hope they're of use to you. Bye.